Hello, this is Johnny Chisholm, and I just wanted to demonstrate the use of Eept, the Environmental Evaluation Planning Tool, in Conservation Boot Camp. The first thing that happens is when you open the Eept, in this case I'm using the 4.10.17 version, you'll notice that the macros have been disabled. So the first thing you need to do is go up and click on in the security warning, the Enable Content. Now the macros are enabled in the software. After we get the spreadsheet set up and the macros enabled, the next step would be to start entering the information about the particular client. So in this case, what we need to do is click on the Begin CPA 52 button, which will bring up a dialog window. And here we'll type in the information. Again, just whatever information is that you get from the lesson on the objectives. Then we're going to select the applicable land uses, and for boot camp we'll need the crop, the pasture. We have no farmstead, but we have associated ag land, forest, range, and we also want to go ahead and click the wildlife modifier and the graze modifier since it'll be grazing. So then we can click the review benchmark conditions. And what this does is it eliminates land uses that we don't have out of this, which will shorten the process a little bit. So click review benchmark conditions. It goes through, customizes, removes any of those land uses that we're not going to use. Now, if we look at this information, you'll see that we have the soil erosion, sheet and reel and wind for crop, pasture. We also have it for range and forest on down. And just notice that any of these that are red, yes, then these are required that the benchmark be documented. If there's not a yes, for example, I think down on subsidence, there's not a yes, it's not a required. But if you can tell the participants if there is a problem there, then they would need to go ahead and document that too. But if there's not a resource concern there, then they don't have to document it. But any of those that are yes, then they would have to document it. So basically, and if you go over to the CPA 52 tab, you'll see that now the information is updated. You'll have the client's name, plan information, identification, and the objectives. And if you'll notice, if you scroll down, there's not any of these that are completed yet. But after the first lesson, that's basically all that would be needed to be documented at this point. So at this point, after the first lesson where they've determined the objectives, then they could actually just save this document on their computer. Through boot camp, they'll be opening it up several times and using it. The next step would be, I think after their resource inventories, they could go in and they would use their resource concern checklist to document this. So in this example, let's say that they use their resource concern checklist and they couldn't use the screening question on cropland. They had to use Russell 2. So once they've done that, they would come in here, and you actually need to make sure and stress that there should not be any blanks left on the CPA 52. So if there's any blanks here, they need to fill those in with information. So in this case, I could come up here and just type in that the soil loss was, say, 6 tons per acre per year, and the t-value on the dominant soils was 5. So that would tell me that there is a resource concern. Once we enter that information, you can either click somewhere in a different cell or press enter. That information is saved. And then you would click the Send to CPA 52. Once that's done, the block will turn green, and if you go over to the CPA 52, you'll see that the benchmark condition is now documented for the soil erosion, the sheet rill and wind erosion on the cropland. And they would continue down through this, the benchmarks selections, selecting the different resource concerns that they might have as they go through it. So you can see as you scroll down, you'll see all these different resource concerns. And this information should match what they've determined out with their resource concern checklist. They would select one of these, fill in any information that they might have, and then click on the Send to CPA 52 button, and it would add it to the first page on the CPA 52. The next step in the process is after they have completed all their resource inventories, they need to make sure that all the resource concerns and existing benchmark conditions are documented. This would also include any human considerations and special environmental concerns. Also, they may want to go ahead and click in the need for action and type in any problems that they may have identified out there. For example, ephemeral gullies. And enter that information. Again, they should have documented all of their individual resource concerns. We'll scroll down and look at some of those. And they also need to make sure that they document any human, economic, and social considerations. For example, land use. They might can just document things like fields 1, 2, and 4 are cropland, etc. And they can enter that information also if they wanted to enter anything about labor. Client provides all labor. Anything that just documents the benchmark conditions that are out there. At this point, they also want to look into the documenting the benchmark conditions on the special environmental concerns. And they may want to look at the guide sheets to guide them through that process. For example, in the Clean Air Act, we're going to document the benchmark condition there. So I'm going to go over to the Clean Air Act guide sheet. And basically the first steps are, if we look, and it's mainly, is the action expected to increase the emission rate of any regulated air pollutant? And we feel like there's not any regulated air pollutants there in the nearby area. So I could go back to the benchmark. And in this case, I could just type that information in, or they may want to look at using the example narratives for the special environmental concerns. And here under the Clean Air Act, there's one that basically documents that it's not expected to increase the emission rate of an irregulated air pollutant. So I could just highlight that cell and press Control C to copy it, and then go back to the environmental evaluation sheet and hit select that one, and then just hit Control V to paste that information in there. And that information then is pasted into the benchmark condition under the special environmental concerns. However, it doesn't all show up there. Now, with the latest version of the EEPT, the 410 version, they've added a button that will actually unlock the cell. So I can click on that button. It unlocks the page. That way I can come in and enlarge the block so that all the narrative is displayed. And you can continue down through that process to document not only the benchmarks of all the resource concerns, the human, economic, and social considerations, but all the special environmental concerns. So that could be done as soon as they've got all their resource inventories done, they've evaluated the special environmental concerns, and they could document that on the CPA 52. Again, they would, this is a process that they will go in and put a little information in there and save it as they go along. So at this point, they can save all that. The next steps would be I think the end of the second week, they will begin to formulate and evaluate their alternatives. And you can also record that on the CPA 52. Of course, you would document what's going to happen with no action. If there's a problem out there, if there's no action taken, the problem's probably going to get worse, or at least keep happening. And then also on their alternatives, they could come in and develop their information from their site-specific practice effects worksheet, that RMS tool that they use to develop some alternatives. Generally, I'd recommend that the first alternative be an RMS, because that's the one that they will, make sure they've treated all the resource concerns. And they could just come in and type in the practices that they're going to do. If they're doing cover crops and residue management, crop rotations, all the different practices that they've identified that they would be using. And they would document that in the list of the alternative. And again, I would probably recommend that their first alternative be an RMS. And then they would come in and develop the effects of the no action and the alternative that they've developed to present to the landowner. Now, at some point later on in the day, I think on the end of the second week, they will present their alternatives to the landowner. And he might decide that he doesn't want to do all those practices that they've recommended that he does. In that case, they would just list the practices that he's actually agreed to implement. So that way they could just document what he's done, and then they would document the effects of the alternative that he chose. So in each one of these, they would enter information about each resource concern. And again, using those Excel spreadsheets can help with that. If I go to the one on the resource concern narratives, for example, the no action one might be something like this. I can copy that, go back to the CPA 52, and just paste that information in there. So basically, with no action, under the present management, the soil erosion will continue or worsen. And again, just continue to move to those resource concern narratives. If, for example, let's say that if he did all those practices that we put in for his alternative, we might see that this narrative would apply. So I can just copy and paste those in there. And if it's the same for both of them, then you can just continue to complete that. So they would go down through all of those resource concerns that they've identified. Also, any of them that does not meet the planning criteria, they should go ahead and check that box. And in some cases, technically, if this is an RMS, there should not be any of these not meet PC buttons checked. But if, for example, he chose to do an alternative that doesn't address everything, then you could still have some things over here checked that would not meet the planning criteria. And again, they would just continue through this process to entirely complete all of the resource concerns and all the effects of the different alternatives as they do those. Now we get to the final step of completing the CPA 52. At this point, the planners have inventoried all the resources, developed alternatives, evaluated those alternatives. They presented their alternatives to the decision maker, and he has made a decision about which alternative he wants to implement. So at that point, they should be able to complete all the necessary information on the CPA 52, including at the top putting in the different alternatives, what practices he's doing in those alternatives, as well as for each resource concern, identifying the effects of the no action, the alternative 1, and the alternative 2. In these cases, you can see here that for alternative 1, there were several practices that was they wanted to present to him, but however, he only accepted a couple of those practices, so the effects from Alternative 1 and Alternative 2 will be different. And in this case, we see that Alternative 1 fully addressed the sheet and rill erosion to planning criteria. However, in the planner's estimation, Alternative 2 would not fully address that sheet and rill erosion, so it still does not meet PC. And again, you would just go down through there and document all of those individual resource concerns for each one of those. We've also looked at all those resource concerns, and we've identified human, social, and economic considerations for all of those. We see different land use, capital, what's going to happen with each one of those alternatives. We also have documented the special environmental concerns, documenting the benchmark, what's going to happen with the no action alternative, and what's going to happen with each one of those alternatives. So we've documented those, identifying some of those especially that might have to have further action. For example, there may be cultural resources there, and the narrative was that we're going to transmit that to the state office for review pending results, and also we need to document in the notes section that we're waiting on the CR determination. In that circumstance, we would need to mark the box that there's further action needed. Same thing with any of those special environmental concerns that may be affected, and documenting all of those individual resource concerns. Then we get down to section K, where we list any easements, permissions, public use permits, etc. For the RMS alternative, we were doing some stream bank stabilization work, so we might need a 404 permit for that, so that would be listed there. Alternative 2, since we weren't doing the stream bank stabilization, he didn't agree to do that, then we wouldn't need that permit. We list cumulative effects and any mitigation, and then most importantly at the bottom we check the box for the alternative that he chose. In this case, he chose Alternative 2 due to financial reasons, and he can't implement all the required practices at that time. We would also record the context. We're looking at this in a local context. We're evaluating it locally on the farm, and as a regional basis and as a national basis. We're looking at the actions as how they would affect the nation as a whole. Then we would go through and make sure that there are no extraordinary circumstances and help us determine the significance of the effects that's going on out there. So we would have to go through and answer each one of these questions to make sure that there are no extraordinary circumstances or significant effects. So we would review each one of those and make sure that we have covered all those extraordinary circumstances. Make sure that those are, if one of these is yes, then that would mean that further evaluation is needed, maybe an EA or an EIS. Of course, that would be out of the field office hands. Once that's done, then the actual planner can sign in Part P what they're signing, that they have completed this form, they've made the decisions about this form. Then below that is Part Q, which is the finding, and all of these actions are to be completed by the responsible federal official. In some cases, it may be the DC, it may depend on states, how they identify who is the responsible federal official for doing environmental evaluations. Of course, the findings, hopefully those have been discussed. It's either not a federal action, it is a federal action that's all been categorically excluded, or it's one that has been sufficiently analyzed in existing EA. Of course, if it's just CTA assistance, it's probably not a federal action. However, if later on the client decides that maybe he wants to sign up for a certain cost share program, such as Eept or any of those type things, then it would become a federal action. So a lot of times it may be, if you can categorically exclude it, even though if it's not a federal action, you might want to go ahead and mark that if it can be categorically excluded. course, if you categorically exclude it, you have to select the particular categorical exclusions that apply. In this situation, probably most of those practices would either fall under number 20, which is implementing soil control measures or soil erosion measures, or number 21, which is water conservation measures, or possibly even number 19, which is just normal minor agricultural practices. So those things would be documented there. Just note that if you use number 2, the categorical exclusions, you have to list those in R2. If you use not a federal action or a existing EA, then you would have to document that in finding number 1. And then at that point, the responsible federal official can sign and need to make sure that any additional notes for, in this case, there was possibility of a cultural resource determination not coming back yet. Make sure that that's documented, that no action should be started until the approved CR review has been received, etc. So that's kind of the whole process on how to develop that CPA 52 in boot camp.